Am I on? Oh, I am. Oh, God. Good morning, everybody. Sorry for the delay. I said a few minutes ago, I think that's pretty loud, actually. I think we had a slight delay because the keynote ran over, so I appreciate you waiting. Just so that you know, the talk will still finish on time. That's a lot to do with the fact that I'm from Ireland. I don't know if there's any Irish guys in the crowd. Is anyone from Ireland in the crowd here? No? I was really hoping we'd have some translators. We don't, that's okay. So I'm sure if any of you European guys who've been to Ireland, two things about the Irish, funny accent, we talk really, really quickly. I'm going to do my very best not to do that today. If I do rush through something and you don't get the acronym that I'm saying or even a complete English sentence, just stop me and I'll revert back. So I'd start by thanking you very much for taking the time this morning to come in and listen to this talk. I hope you all had a great time last night at the party or parties that you went to, and there are not too many sore heads out there. I'd like to start, before I begin the talk, by just introducing myself. So my name is Prendergast. I'm a business development manager with Amazon Web Services, and I'm part of a team that focuses on working exclusively with game developers and helping them to leverage the cloud to differentiate themselves in the market. I've actually got one of my colleagues in the audience. I told him I was going to call him out. Is Nate, who's sitting here. He's part of the team. The reason why I'm calling out Nate is that Nate was a great help in me putting this presentation together and was also almost exclusively responsible for the demo that I'm going to show. So Nate and I made a deal that if the demo went wrong, I could just point at him and say it's his fault. We didn't actually agree it together. I agreed it myself last night. And I told him this morning before we came in. But I'm sure it'll be absolutely fine. So, as I say, I'm part of a team that works with game developers, and we work with game developers of all stripes. So we work with AAA developers who are developing console titles. We work with MMOs. We work with social game developers. We work with, and obviously with mobile game developers quite a bit as well. And that actually obviously is the focus of this talk. So when we were putting the talk together, we decided to break it into three distinct pieces. The first piece, I think, would be to tell you what we're seeing in the market. And it's not just like what AWS is seeing in the market or Amazon seeing in the market, but what are the general trends that we're seeing in the market. From there, we'll move on to the next section. How can AWS help you guys in a way that continues to enable you to focus on what really matters? And I think that everybody in this room would agree that the most fundamental and core competency that you need to have is focus on the game itself. And then we look at some common use cases we see. And the reason why I say common rather than best practices is that this is an industry that's still developing, and I think it'll be some time before we get to those really best practice situations. We'll talk about some common practices. So let's get started with something around market direction. The guys are from Supercell are here, and I want to make a quote from Ilkka Parvainen. I think I've said it kind of right, but I do apologize. Who is the CEO of Supercell, who was at Slush last week in Helsinki and made a really insightful comment when he said that small is the new big. And I think that that doesn't just apply to indie developers, it also applies to really large companies. The concept, as Ilkka talked about, was about even large companies breaking into small teams, 5 or 6 people who can rapidly innovate and create new experiences for customers. And there has to be a lot of credence with what he's saying for Supercell, because Supercell currently has the number 1 and 2 games, as I saw this morning, on the App Store. Clash of Clans and Heyday. So there's this huge democratizing effect that's happened since the advent of Facebook and then the iPhone, which changed and had a tectonic shift in the way that games were developed. Any AAA game developers in the audience? Anybody who's come from the AAA space? There's a couple of guys. So guys from that space will tell you, and even today, when you look at things like Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed 3, Call of Duty Black Ops, those games take hundreds of people and thousands of man-hours over a number of years to bring those games to market. And they're making large bets on what they assume their end customer will want. With, I say, the advent of Facebook for social games, and the likes of Zynga and Playfish and Wooga and others, came to the market and completely dramatically changed the landscape from a game development perspective, and also introduced new audiences to gameplay that hadn't actually played games before. Since about 2009 onwards, we're starting to see more and more of those same developers move towards mobile. It became increasingly more difficult to develop games for Facebook. you know, the Facebook tax credit, you have the cost of marketing, etc. It can make it really difficult to get your game seen on Facebook. You can still be successful, obviously, there, but a lot more start to see that, especially for smaller guys, there's a lot larger opportunity to start moving towards mobile, both for iOS and for Android. So what we see normally is you've got normally a minimum of about 2 folks. You've got a game designer who's got an idea either for a different spin on an existing game mechanic, or he's thought of something completely new. Like maybe it's a new slow-mo game like Osmosis, which is, you know, very relaxing, very slow game. He's creating a new genre. So you've got an excellent game designer, and you normally have a game developer as well. That tends to be the core of what you really need to start building a game. You may or may not have an artist. I think it's an underrated unrecognized part of the actual development process. Having a great artist can make a huge difference from both the icon design right to the actual gameplay itself and how the aesthetic looks. And sound is another part as well. That's very often not overlooked and is actually critical for the success of your game. But normally you have 2 guys minimum. You might outsource the art. And they've just got this great idea. So the next thing they're going to need is some kind of an engine. And there are a plethora of engines out there as well that have grown since, I say, the launch of the iPhone and of Facebook. So typical engines you see out there, Unity, you got Epic's Unreal, you've got Cocos 2D, you've got Crytek. I don't know if that's creeping off the end. But there is a whole bunch more. There's Corona, there's Game Salad, Marmalade. You can roll your own and use Box 2D if you want a physics engine. Really, the choices you have are endless, really. We do see a huge uptake in the use of, and I'm sure you all know this already, in the use of Unity. Unity seems to be very, very popular with game developers, both hobbyists and professionals. I think the reason why is that for artists, it's a great way to show off your portfolio, and you can learn JavaScript pretty easily. For hardcore developers, you've got C#. It creates really rich 3D experiences, which is a kind of a trend that we're starting to see both on the social and mobile side, a move from 2D to 3D. And there's a whole bunch of plugins that are available for it. Actually, we recently announced for in-app purchase and for Game Circle for the Kindle and the Amazon App Store, a plugin through Prime 31 that makes integration with Unity into those services extremely easy, and I'd recommend you check that out. It's free to use. You can download it from the developer site on Amazon.com. So they go off, they create this game, patch it up, and then they start to think, okay, where am I going to put this game? I mean, I wonder, where would you put the first game? You put it into iTunes, the App Store. Everybody kind of tends to look to develop for the App Store first and think of iOS only or iOS first. But there are a number of choices. Google Play, you got the Amazon App Store. And actually, recently, we had some feedback from a customer, TinyCo, who developed with their Griffin platform, their own in-house platform, for both iOS and for Android, and ported straight onto, or launched onto the Amazon App Store. And based on the data and the analysis that they did themselves, they actually started to see an interesting statistic. They started to see that for every single dollar that they made on iTunes App Store, they were making $1.80 on Amazon. So it's really worthwhile thinking as you're going forward about developing not just for iOS, but also developing for the App Store as well. There's some folks from the App Store here, I think. If there aren't, and you want to talk to them, I can certainly introduce you to those guys afterwards. And obviously, you know, once you've gone to the marketplace, it goes off and it goes to millions of users. Now, I've kind of glossed over a really important part here, which is the kind of pre-work that you're going to be doing in terms of creating frenzy and creating users, acquisition. So before you go to the marketplace, you may have some sort of a private beta that you run. You may have a blog about it. You may put on something like Touch Arcade and start getting reviews back that way. And you start to try and generate interest around the game before it launches. Press packs, etc. There's a lot of work, a lot of marketing that goes into the making of these games, equally as much as the actual development of the game itself. And when it launches, you could use things like iAd or MoPub to continue using that, creating that user acquisition and getting more and more users into the top of the funnel. And it's a very expensive part of it. And once it goes out into the wild, you sit back, and then you just wait for all the money to roll in. You retire. Forget. Okay, so some guys laughing that have actually gone through the experience and said that's not true. I say that kind of tongue-in-cheek, but you know, interestingly enough, a study that was done by Kinvey, which is published in Gigome recently, showed that, of all the apps that are on the iOS App Store right now, only 35% of them have a back-end infrastructure. So they have no back-end infrastructure at all. They're static, they're out there, and the only way the developer knows if he's making money is if he gets a check in the post. It's slightly worse on Android. Only 18% of the apps up there actually have a back-end. So when I say a little bit tongue-in-cheek, in some ways it's true. And from a developer's point of view, I can understand that, especially if you're a small team or working in a small team within a larger organization. You've got a finite amount of resources, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. How can we help you to build out a back-end infrastructure that empowers you to start collecting data and then listening to what your customer is saying? And it's the true language of your customer. It's the most honest dialogue you have with your customer is the data that you collect and analyze from them. You've got a finite amount of resources. You've got a developer. He could also be an IT guy. But do you really want him focused on IT infrastructure, or do you want him focused on the game? This slide is 2.5 weeks old, and it shows the top grossing apps in the iOS App Store right now. I looked at it again this morning. It's changed slightly. Clash of Clans has gone this way, to your left. If you haven't played the game, play it, it's awesome. But the one thing to notice about these apps, there's actually a couple of things to notice. First of all, the thing to know is that most of them are games. So this morning, 7 out of the top 10 grossing apps were games. Yesterday morning, I looked, it was 8. 2.5 weeks ago, it was 9. Okay? The other thing to note about these is they're all free. If you notice that, they're all freemium-based. Okay? But they're the top grossing apps. So how can that be? You're giving away for free, but you're the top grossing apps. That's because they enable in-app purchases. So they're successful for a number of reasons. Number one, they remove friction. You're a user, you're about to buy a game. If you've got to buy something, you really don't know if you like it or not, you might just pass it by and say, nah, I'm not going to spend the 99 cents or the $1.99 or whatever it may be. I'm going to leave it. So you remove that barrier entry. The user is going to download that game. He's going to get engaged with the game. He or she will get engaged with that game, start having fun with that game. They really enjoy it. They get emotionally attached and involved with the game. The second thing is you're allowing the user and empowering them to make the decision on what the value of the game is to them. So you may have folks who say, I'm going to download the game, play it for free, grind like crazy, and never spend a penny. And that's totally fine. I'll come back to it in a second, but that is awesome. You want that. The second, folks, might be that first dollar purchase that you make really easy within the first few minutes of your game to enable them to buy something. That's the 99 cents. In the industry, sometimes they're called minnows. You're going to hear a lot of fish terms here in the next while. One of them's going to be a mammal, but I'm going to call it a fish. But these people are important as well. That's the first dollar. They spend that 99 cents. Okay? Then you got folks who say, I'm enjoying this game so much, I'm willing to pay what I would spend on a movie, going out to the theater and having a meal, maybe $60. Call them dolphins. And then at the very end, you have these folks that are willing to spend a lot of money on your game. A lot of money on your game. We're talking about thousands of dollars on your game. And sometimes the industry calls those whales, which is the mammal. Now, it's not a phrase or a term that I'm particularly endeared to myself and that I particularly like. I prefer the term fan. And the connotation is very different. A fan is someone who's engaged and is making those purchases because they want to make those purchases, because they want you to succeed, and because they love what you're doing and they want you to keep on doing it. So the interesting thing to note here is that another interesting statistic, actually, is that Localistics did a survey and published an interesting statistic. They said that 1/4 of all apps that are downloaded are opened once and then removed. Now, if you're in a freemium model, that is not a good thing for you at all. You're not going to be going to the beach. You're not going to be retiring anytime soon, and you're going to be out of business pretty soon. The other last thing I'll say about this before I move on is that when you move to a freemium model, you've moved away from product selling and you've moved into service selling. So what do I mean by that? When you create something like an app and you sell that product for a price, you say, here's a fair and equitable price, $4.99, $19.99, $99.99, whatever it may be. You sell that to your user. That's it. The deal is done. There's no more monetizing that user. And you've reduced the number of users you can get as well, because only a certain portion of people will be willing to pay upfront that amount of money. So the deal is done. It's a product, you walk away, you're done. When you do a freemium type model, your work has just begun. Your work for both the development, your work from a marketing perspective has just begun once you enter a relationship with that user, with that game player. Because you need to be listening to everything that they're doing. If they're dropping out of your game after a few minutes and deleting it, that's not good news. You need to understand, how are they using your game? Are they using it the way I thought? And customers will, the users will surprise you on how they're using the game. You may have done it so the mechanic is set up so they can collect loads of coins and loads of trophies, but the most important thing to them is to do it the fastest time. Maybe by making a tweak on that yourself, you can actually get more users to play your games. So you've moved into a service-based model. And if you're in a service-based model, you have to listen intently to your customer and have a very close relationship to them. And I'm not just talking about things like using social media like Twitter and Facebook and the reviews page. They're all really, really important, but I can guarantee you, same as me, every single one of you in this room, what you say and what you do are two different things. I will go to the gym, I don't. So what you say and what you do are two different things. So the true language of your customer, the true language where they're speaking the most honestly to you, is via the data that you gather. So what else do we see? The most successful game companies, game shops, own their own data. So from the very get-go, when they're in beta, before they launch, after they launch, they're collecting data on their games. Now they may, if they're very small, start off by using something like Flurry or App Annie. So maybe normally an afterthought. They start integrating those SDKs into their game. And that's great. You get some great information from that, some basic information around geography, gender, when are they downloading. But after a while, you're going to want to start, as you get larger, you're going to start wanting to do it yourself. And you shouldn't wait until you're large enough to want to start gathering the data and getting a BI scientist in to start gathering. You should be gathering the data from the very beginning, the very, very beginning. The next thing we see is that, as I mentioned already, a portion of those apps are only opened once, and then they're deleted in the first week. Now, I bet everybody in this room, if you looked on your device, there's going to be an application on there, an app on there that you have not opened in over a month. Every one of you. I know I've got one. Again, it's a fitness app. I know you wouldn't think it to look at me. I know. This just happens naturally. But if you were to I've got an app for a fitness app. I was going to get fit. I was going to use it. I looked at it. I put in a whole bunch of stuff, and then I never used it again. And it's sitting inside there. And actually, it's interesting because Flurry published a study recently, a megatrend study, because they're getting all this aggregate information in from multiple developers. And they show this retention period over a 90-day window over the frequency of use. You see two interesting things here. You notice that basically social games have a longer retention lifespan on devices, but the frequency of use is actually much, much higher. So there's a peak, and then it basically levels off. Now, I can certainly think of games that are like that, and I'm sure you can too. Words with Friends, OMG Pops Draw Something, great examples of that. Games that were virally went huge, crazy, crazy numbers. And those companies need to scale to meet that demand, to make sure they could provide those users with that game experience. And then it leveled back down, and they needed to scale back down to meet that. And AWS definitely helps you do that as one of the benefits of the cloud. The other thing is frequency of use. There's a window when you can monetize those users, and it's shorter than if you look at single games, which then goes back to that point. Single games are actually on the device longer, but the actual frequency of use is much lower. So you might think that's a good thing, at least it's still on the device, but it's not really. If they're not interacting and they're not engaged with your app, then you're not monetizing that user either, and they're not engaged with you. The last thing is, I'll mention here, is measure failure to success. Now, measuring failure to success is actually a bit harsh. What I mean by that is iterating your way to success. So you're having smaller successes until you get to that really big success. Does anybody know how many games Rovio made before Angry Birds? 100? Actually, I've got no prize for this, to be honest with you. 30? Actually, 51. Number 52 was success. Number 52. OMG Pop had 35 before Draw Something. But the interesting thing to note about Rovio is that they learned from every single game that they made. whether they're making it for third party or making it for themselves. They learned, and they had some successes with those earlier games as well, but nothing to the extent of Angry Birds. But they listened very, very closely to their customers. They gathered data, and they listened to their customers, and they acted on that. And they worked very, very hard on the marketing piece of that, and they learned from that as well. So that's the other thing. You need to iterate quickly, iterate often. Some numbers say that your first 10 games are really going to suck, so you may as well just get them out of the way. So go at it, gung-ho, get them out there. I want to say get them out there. Don't go out with what's known as an MVP, a minimum viable product. You can go with a small game that's got a number of levels, but don't leave anything critical out. Like, don't say, I'm going to do a minimum viable product, and I'm not going to put in leaderboards. I'm going to make it a real grind for them, and then I learn from that, and I'll just iterate. No, make it a really polished, really good game. Make it really, really fun. Make sure it's complete, maybe a small piece of it, and then iterate thereafter. So to summarize, the things that we're seeing are, one, there's been a huge democratizing effect in gaming from the marketing perspective. Developers now have access to millions of users without having to go through the traditional retail model. But a developer publishes develops a game, he gives it to a publisher, puts it onto retail, it goes on the shelf, and it sells. You guys now have the ability to get access to millions of potential customers. So, and the tools are there to develop those, to develop really rich experiences. So the democratizing effect is there. We're seeing that the games as a service are here to stay. So I said freemium. I didn't say freemium is here to stay. Freemium is just the way that game developers have realized that they can actually monetize right now. But that may not be the case in a few years from now. There's certainly game companies who are bucking that trend. Mojang with Minecraft is a great example. Huge fan base, costs you $7.99, I believe, to download it. So maybe the pricing model will change, but the relationship in terms of it being a service is here for the long haul. And that being the case, you really need to focus on what matters. One is your game. So when you're thinking about your game design, there are three pieces you think about. There's the core game design. It has to be fun first and foremost. Doesn't matter what else you do. It has to be fun. It has to be aesthetically pleasing. You need to think about what is your monetization model going to be. Is it balanced? And the third thing you need to think about is, what data am I going to collect? What are the events that I'm going to collect? And then that's how you basically start learning from your customer and iterating and having success thereafter. Maybe not with your first game, not with your second game, or maybe with your first game. Maybe with your 10th game, or your 52nd game. Persistence really does count as well. So when Nate and I and the guys were thinking about this in terms of what would we talk about, I mean, obviously, Amazon, you guys have been here for the last few days. You've heard numerous talks, I'm sure, about the benefits of cloud. But just to reiterate them again, first thing to note is that games are a risky business, right? As I mentioned, your first 10 games may fail, so get them out of the way quickly. So if you think about the benefits of the cloud should offer, first is no capital infrastructure cost. Now, if you're going to have 10 failures and you've got to buy new hardware every single time because the designer says, I want it to look like this, and you'll go out of business really, really quickly. Your parents will stop giving you money. Angels will stop giving you money. VC certainly won't give you any more money after the first go. So no capital cost. Pay-as-you-go model. So minimize your costs. Try something new. Don't be afraid to take risk. Work your way from failure to success. Learn from each one. So pay-as-you-go, really, really important. Scale and elasticity. We've got a social game, and it goes viral. You better be able to spin up the number of servers you need to be able to get those users. They have a bad experience. They've got a very short patience window. They're just going to get rid of it. So being able to scale is important. But elasticity is just as important. Being able to rise and meet that peak and pay for that as you go, but also as the game levels off, back down from that peak, being able to also scale back down. So you're only paying for what you use. Again, is critical and is a benefit of the cloud. Rapid provisioning. Being able to spin up the servers you need, the storage you need, et cetera, increase your database size, et cetera, in minutes is going to be critical for your success as well. And it's got a global footprint. And the last most important thing, which I'm going to fall back to here, is enable you to focus on what matters. Unless IT infrastructure is a core competency of your business, you shouldn't have to focus on that. And AWS can take on IT infrastructure, which is really the undifferentiated heavy lifting, and enables you to focus on what's really important to you guys, and that is actually making really, really great games. So we enable you through the building blocks we provide to create any kind of configuration, any kind of solution you want. But as I mentioned, you may have like 2 guys, 1 guy, small team. And you don't want them to be focused on building out IT infrastructure and trying different things and then maintaining it. You can certainly do so. We got cases of engineers being able to spin up 300 servers and manage, one guy managed over 300 servers. FunPlus told us this recently. So we thought about a solution that would enable you guys to do POCs and get off the ground really, really quickly and start gathering data right away for your games. So focus on your games, but also gathering data. And the solution I'm going to show you is something we're starting to being used quite a bit, is Elastic Beanstalk. So I'm going to do a switch here. This is where demo time comes. Neat. So just so you know what Elastic Beanstalk is, Elastic Beanstalk enables you to deploy, it deploys and it manages your environment on the cloud for you. It takes care, you just focus on building your application logic. You then upload it into the cloud. It takes care of deployment, it takes care of the management, it takes care of the health of the environment, it takes care of the scaling of the environment for you. But it always allows you to have root-level access. You always have control. You're always able to go back into the box and have root-level access and take control of that environment anytime you want. You don't have to, but you certainly can. And that's kind of an important fact. Now, I'm going to be doing a bit of a jiggery-pokery, as they say in Ireland, because I'm going to be looking here, and we'll see what my spatial skills are like. But I'm going to show you how you would set up a new environment. And hopefully it hasn't gone off screen for you guys, but if I click on here and say I want to create a new environment, cats. Good name, eh? And then at this point, I could choose to upload an existing application. So if you're working, and I'll show you in a moment, but you have a plethora of languages that you can use. We launched it with Java, Tomcat 6 and 7. We've added PHP, we've added Python. We've recently just announced Ruby on Rails, or I should say Ruby, rather, because we're using Ruby with Sinatra here. And it also supports .NET. So whatever your language choice is, you can pick it at this point. I'm just going to select this one. I'm going to use a sample for this one. But at this point, I could have, if I was using Java, clicked on it, found my WAR file. If I was using PHP or I was using Python, get my zip. If you're using GitHub and you've got a Git repository, you can use the command line and basically point it at that Git and pull that from the Git repository. I'm just going to show it using a sample application. Give it an environment name. Cats. Cats will be clear in a moment. Man, I would have been shocked if that one was taken. And here I can select the instance type I want. What kind of instance do I want? You're not tied to that instance. For any of you guys who are not currently using Amazon Web Services, I suspect there's not too many, but if there are, we have a free tier. You can basically sign up to Amazon.com, you get 1 year free usage, and encourage you to do so if you haven't done so already. But I'm just going to leave it at the T1 Micro for right now. You can enter a key pair. This will enable you to access the EC2 instances afterward if you want to. Go to demo. I can optionally select whether or not I want to have SNS messages sent to me of important events that are happening. And I could put something like /health here so I could have a URL to tell me major changes that are happening to my environment. So there's my, oh, I think I missed something, didn't I? Yeah. Aha, I want a database. Pretty important. Okay. So I also have the ability to create a database at this point. So we have a service called RDS, Relational Database Service, which takes care of the kind of mundane DBA tasks, such as patching, updating. It'll also do things like high availability by enabling you to replicate data across AZs, multiple availability zones. You can do one-click resizing of those boxes as well, so you can basically go to larger database sizes if you want to. So I'm going to say, create me an instance. It's MySQL, which tends to be the default we see out there anyway. I'm going to use a T1 Micro. It's going to be 5 gig in size. It's going to be admin. I'm not saying that out loud. And I also have a retention policy here. So if you're creating multiple environments, doing POCs, you may tear down that Elastic Beanstalk, but you might want to retain your schema and your data. So what you can say to Elastic Beanstalk is create a snapshot of that for me so that I can then reload a new database when I create a new environment for myself as I continue my testing. And I can ask it to spread it across multiple AZs as well if I want to for high availability. So you do a POC, you may not want this, but when you go live, highly recommend that you do. So it's going to go off, create it if I haven't made a mistake. OK. And like any good chef in a cooking show, here's one I made earlier. Reinvent game. You can see the event details here. So if we look at the events, let's see. Are you guys able to see that completely on the screen? You are? OK, it's just me then. I can't see the full screen. But irrespective, what it'll do is it'll go off. It will start to create the environment for you on your behalf. It will create an S3 bucket on your behalf. That's for your log files for your application, so you can do debugging. It'll create an elastic load balancer for you on your behalf as well. It'll create a security group for you with the default security group rules, which is nothing in. It will create the instances for you. It will load the application on there for you, and then it'll make it available to you. And it gives you this URL when it's finished. Now, it also includes monitoring. It'll load CloudWatch for you. So those, perhaps who don't know what CloudWatch is a monitoring tool. It's provided free of charge for every 5 minutes of polling, and it, out of the box, looks at things like CPU, network I/O for latency, etc. But you can also create custom events as well if you want to, and have them push to CloudWatch as well, and have it act upon those. That's critical when we look at things like auto-scaling. So I can edit this configuration if I want to. And by the way, everything I'm showing you here can be done at the CLI. You can script this as well. But at this point, if I wanted to, I could change my instance type on the fly, and it would do it for me with no downtime. I could stand up another Elastic Beanstalk environment for my upgrade. I did an upgrade, tested it, when I'm happy with it, and put it into production. I can just do a swap URL. The user just sees a new experience. They're not aware of it. So I'm going to leave that at the moment. Auto-scaling. Auto-scaling uses the trifecta of CloudWatch, and it uses it uses the ELB, the Elastic Load Balancer, to pull metrics, and you can set thresholds. So for example, you might say, by default, it says here, I have a minimum of 1 server and a maximum of 4. You could change that to say 2 and 4. You could change it to 2 and to 10. You could change it to say whatever you feel that you need, but you can set the minimum max in terms of a number of instances it will spin up on your behalf. And then you can define what are the metrics I want you to trigger upon. You might say, if CPU goes to beyond 75%, spin up another instance. And auto-scaling will add an instance of the type that you've prescribed into the environment for you and add it to load balancer and redistribute the traffic. But equally as important, if another threshold is, if CPU goes below 30%, take the instance away, it will do that as well. Again, going back to reducing your costs and paying only for what you use. I mentioned notifications already. And you can also set environment variables for the container itself. So we created this cool little game. I mean Nate. It's called Cat Catcher. Well, I call it Pat's Cats. And unfortunately, the screen says I can't really see the game, which is really annoying. Because the game is super, super cool. Got to catch these cats. I don't know if you guys can do that. Is that any other tech check guys are away at the fairies there? I'm going to grab this and try and move it back, because I really want you to see the game. I don't know why I really want you to see the game. I'm going to actually bail out before I even get started. There it is. Now, it's fair enough to say that I actually suck at this game. Ooh, I got 2 points. 7 points. Whoa! I got 17 points. That's my best score so far. And then it shows you this leaderboard. And I'll take you through the application logic and what we did in a moment. Did anybody go to the keynote yesterday? Yeah, we all went to the keynote yesterday. Did you see NASA, Kawaja, the rocket scientist on coffee? He did an awesome, really, that's not my quote, but he did a really awesome job of talking about landing Curiosity on Mars and the fact they had found water. Nate and I did one better. We found life, because you can see all these names here. These are all Martians that we found that really love the game. So, now I'm stuck with the game. Here we go. Although it's true, you know, the one thing I did notice, actually, that was an incredible thing that those guys did. I mean, landing that spot on Mars. But the other flip side of that is, if you think about it, you know, game developers, we got the coolest job in the world, because we can help people experience that from a visceral perspective. You could actually create a game where the game is all about someone landing something pinpoint on Mars. That's really, really cool. And they'd meet Martians. You could define what kind of Martians they are. Are they cute and cuddly and they gather them and look after them, or are they hell-bent on destruction and you got to destroy them? So your options are like endless when you're a game developer. It's pretty cool. You don't have to live in the real world or be held down by physics at all. Okay. So that was the demo. So what you're left with in the end, when I created that environment, you see how long it took. It didn't take much at all because I had it pre-made. But what you have is this scalable environment that looks after the health of the environment on your behalf and scales based on parameters that you have dictated, and enables you to focus on the core, which is your game, and enables you to gather that all critical data from your users. Now, some of the things we see that actually game developers doing is, after time, database intensity write-oriented operation. We do see developers after a period of time move to sharding, or they may add a caching tier in there. So they may use Memcache, they may use Amazon Web Services Elastic Cache, or they may use, I've seen very popular actually, is Redis as well, the key value store, to take the heat off of the database. So they'll write to Redis and then periodically do lazy writes off to the database. Interesting to note is, I show that snapshot and then I show it being backed off with S3. With RDS, it will automatically take care of backups for you as well. So we'll look at some use cases as well. And I've got 4. The first one I look at is gathering event data. So just based on that little demo we showed of Cat Catcher, it'll be available on iOS and Android. No, it won't. For free? No. Let's look at a really simple use case. So here's the use case. You can gather whatever telemetry data you want. In this case, we decided to collect high scores. So the user plays a session, we save off the high score and persist that to disk, to the device. From there, we upload it to the server, and then we do verification. If it's the first time that the user, we verify first, is it the first time that we've received that user's name and their high score? And if it is, then we persist it to the database. If it's not the first time, then we will check and see, is the score higher than the higher score he already has on the database? If it is, update. If it's not, don't. And then, as I said, RDS will take care of the automatic backing up of that data for you. So this is the server-side code here, and as I said, we stripped a lot of this out so I can make it fit in this slide, but we're using Ruby with Sinatra here because we're making API calls, but really all we're doing is creating a very simple schema for a database that just says, when I get a push from the device of the user's name and their high score, it'll put it into the database that we've created. The schema that we created was just username and a score as an integer. We can also enable us to get that data and display that high score as well. On the client side, here's some pseudocode. It shows you doing a connection over HTTP by that URL, which represents the URL I created, that POC for that Elastic Beanstalk container I created. And I'm just passing up 2 parameters. One is Nate, and one is Nate's high score, which is much better than mine. When the session's ended, we can now do a get and then compare his score to other users' score and see how we compare. And that's very simply by doing another URL connection and then doing a get and pulling that data down. Now, but you can imagine, and this could be any data. It could be any event data that you wish to collect, any telemetry data you want to collect. The process is the same. It's really the environment is set up for you so that you basically focus on the logic that you want and you can do whatever you want. So you can imagine you could add friends. You could add your Facebook friends, for example. You could make a request on the client device saying, do you want to add your friends? They make a connection out to the Facebook API. They do a get and then a put, and they can then pass that up, push it up to the server, and then that's added into the backend database as well. So you can imagine you can start doing some creative things where you could say, as I'm playing the game, persist the score for me and compare the score to the scores that I have up in my database and see, am I passing any of my friends? And if I am passing the friend, display that score in game. And at this point here, you see that My score was 340, and I beat Phil. I don't know who Phil is. Phil is one of my 580 friends on Facebook. I don't know if you have that many friends. But you all have friends, basically, you don't know who is that guy. But I've beaten Phil. I'm quite pleased with that. Then it'll post my scores to Phil. Phil will see that score. Phil will want to beat me. He doesn't know who I am, but he wants to beat me. He will come back into the game, and you get this virtuous circle. The next thing is in-app purchase verification. This is something you guys do as well. The app stores make this really, really easy, and I'm going to walk you through the Amazon experience right now. A user initiates a purchase. They've gone through the game. You've been monitoring what they're doing. And they start making purchases. Maybe it could be aesthetic. It could be power-ups. But they start to initiate a purchase. They get a receipt. That receipt, again, is pushed up over HTTP to the server. When you register your application with the App Store, you get a secret key. So the secret key and the purchase ID will then, over HTTPS, be sent to the App Store. The App Store would do a verification. You'd persist on the database, and then you would unlock. And all this done asynchronously, obviously very, very quickly. So when you think about it, what you're now starting to do is you're starting to collect event data on how they're using your game, and you're starting to see not only what they're buying, but you're able to see from a timestamp perspective when they're buying. So that's pretty critical information. I think an interesting statistic I saw yesterday from Aaron Rubinson when he talked about the Amazon App Store. Most purchases on the Kindle Fire are made in the first within 16 hours, and the next purchase is made 1 hour after that. So enabling your users to make that purchase will be pretty important, and knowing that information obviously is very important as well. And that brings me on to my next topic, which is analytics. Now, analytics can be really, really scary when you think about it, right? You've got two guys, you're focused on the game, you're a developer, and then someone says, now you guys start doing analytics, and you go, whoa, that's a lot. That could be a lot to take on. You don't have to think of boiling the ocean right away. Like I say, gather the data. You can start to use tools like Flurry and App Annie, but then start looking at tools like Tableau. You can download Tableau for free. I think it's like $1,000 for a license. And start pointing at your SQL database and make comparisons. Start running your own analytics against it. How's it comparing against the information you're getting from Flurry? As you get more and more confident, wean yourself off of Flurry. But as you grow, and you get thousands and millions of users, you're going to get to a point where you're going to have to start crunching some very large amounts of data, looking for that needle in the haystack. All the John Smiths are buying 5 red coins in wherever. So you'll need to do MapReduce. You need to do a MapReduce job. And present that, you can basically, using Amazon's Elastic MapReduce, you can spin up the requisite number of instances you do. We take care of spinning up those clusters for you. All you have to do is focus on writing those queries. And once you have the result, post that result up into a Hive database, and again, you could have Tableau point at that and give you that BI visualization of the data that you're looking to collect. Other thing to note with Elastic MapReduce, what we tend to see customers doing is they'll set up a core cluster on demand, and then they'll make a bid on what's called the spot market, where you set your own price at a very low cost price. If the instances become available at the price you set, automatically add those data nodes into your cluster, extend your cluster, speed up the time it takes to get the job done, and also reduce your cost. So that's something that's really worth looking at. Spot is an ideal use case for doing these kind of large analytic jobs. So you've got the data, you know how they're playing your game, you know where they're having the grind, you can basically make your in-app purchases at times that help them get over the grind by the way through. Maybe you start to do A/B testing as well, where you start to see that the brown horse is much more popular than the white horse. And you found the white horse is really popular. A lot of people want to buy the white horse, so you need to get that content out to them fast. I know guys that have artists on staff who do nothing but create content every day, and they're pushing out new content every day. It keeps you engaged with the user. You send them notifications every day. You look at your device, it's got the little red button with the 1 on it. Human nature is either I've got to see what's the message for me, it's a nice little card, or else it's just I need to clean this, depending on which way your bent is. So what I think people are doing is, the artist creates the content, the release manager releases it for distribution into CloudFront, in this case, our CDN. The user gets some sort of form of a push notification, which then he requests for the data, and the data is delivered down to him. Now, tools I see from a server perspective are things like Alien Brain. You could simplify this even further and just have the artist send it to an S3 bucket, and then have the release manager move it on to the next bucket, which would then push it out to CloudFront for you. So just to summarize, guys, so I'm a little bit 5 minutes over. In a service-oriented business that you're going to be in for game development, especially for mobile, data is the language that your customer uses to talk to you. It's the most honest dialogue that your user is going to have with you. And it's critical that you listen to that data so that you can engage with them. It's critical that you use that data to differentiate yourself and how you iterate. It's a very, very busy market. There are over 700,000 apps, for example, on iOS right now. So differentiate yourself is important. Retention can be equally, if not more important than acquisition. So retaining the users you've got is critical, and listening to them is how you do it. If you do that, you'll monetize. And I wish you every success. I look forward to playing your games. Thanks, guys. I got some.